Hello all, this week we are going to draw Batgirl. Batgirl made her first appearance in Detective Comics number 359 in 1966. Unlike most comic characters, she was created first for the 1960s Batman TV show, starring Adam West and Burt Ward. She was later imported into the comic books to get young girls interested in reading comics and hopefully to boost the sales of the Batman books at the time. This drawing is loosely based on a drawing I saw on Instagram by Chris Bichello. He drew Magic looking into the camera with kind of a side eye, hunched over sideways, and almost like a Spider-Man type of pose. And I wanted to do something similar, and I decided on Batgirl because she's one of my favorite comic book characters and has been since I was a kid. Also in this drawing we do something different. Instead of just a textured background with some shapes that look cool and draw your attention to the character, we actually draw on a cityscape. Not a super fancy one, it's just a one-point perspective, and technically you can't even really call it one point because nothing actually vanishes. It's pretty much a straight-on scene of the city, but we use the one-point perspective grid in Clip Studio to get the effect and make it easier to draw and follow the lines. As you can see, the basic shape is coming together quite quickly because I knew where I was going with this from the start because of the aforementioned picture that Chris Bichello drew. My history of Batgirl started when I was a kid. There used to be this little store right next to a Subway downtown in the town I grew up in. And they had racks of old comic books, and they were cheap. I mean, they were like $1, $2 each. So the first batch I bought was some early Daredevils 2, 3, and 4, I believe, and then number 9 and 15. And I got a Fantastic Four number 52, the first appearance of the Black Panther. One of the early Spider-Man Ditko covers, the super famous one where the Hobgoblin got him in the webs and he's pulling him into the sky. And I also got Detective Comics 359, the first appearance of Batgirl. I just love the cover with the Batgirl running at you in the stark black and yellow costume and Batman and Robin behind her, and it had this really ugly dark purple background. I didn't know it was Batgirl's first appearance at the time. I just knew it was cool and I wanted to have it, and it was like $2 or $3, so I bought that with the rest of the books. Okay, right now we're working on her face. When you're drawing a female character, simple is better. You don't want a lot of lines on her face because the more lines you draw, they make her look older, and Batgirl is a teenage girl. I think she's in her late teens, 17, 18, when she first started working with Batman. So we don't want her to look old and Aunt May-like, so we don't want a lot of lines on her face. A few years after I bought that original copy of Detective Comics 359, my mother, who worked in a bar at the time, called me up and said, "Hey, Willie Nelson," yes, his name was Willie Nelson, he was a mailman, and he lived in our town, and he had a collection of comic books from when he was a kid. He was my parents' age. So she said, "Willie Nelson brought his comics down, and he wants you to come take a look at them." So I go down there, and I'm looking through Willie Nelson's comics, and it's a bunch of Flash. I mean, he had Showcase number 8, which was the second appearance of the Silver Age Flash. He had a bunch of the early issues. He didn't have 105, which is technically Flash number 1 from the Silver Age. And also in that book was a copy of Detective 359, which was much nicer than the one I had at the time. And Willie Nelson said, "Hey, if you're interested in any of these, just give me $1 each and take whichever ones you want." Now, I was a broke kid at the time in high school, so I didn't really have any money. So I leaned over to my mother and said, "Hey, Mom, I need you to lend me $160, like right now." She's like, "$160 for funny books?" I'm like, "Trust me, I'll pay you back later." So she reluctantly gave me $160-something, and I gave it to Willie Nelson, and I took home pretty much all of his comic books except the war books because I have an aversion to Black Hawk. And when I was younger, when you went to look at comic books, either with a tag sale or a friend of the family or you were in a store, there were always large runs of either Black Hawk or Conan. So I really started to hate when I would look at things and I would find Black Hawk and Conan, and that's a thing that continues to this day. As you can see, her costume's coming together, the pose is looking pretty good, we got everything where we want it, and now it's just a matter of details on the character. We got the flowing hair, which she's a redhead, so you get the flowing red hair. Now we just got to get in the musculature, which is a side view on this one. So it's not as prominent with her abs and everything. And she's also sitting on a ledge on top of the city, which we'll get to later. In her first appearance, Batgirl starts out working her job in the library. She's a librarian. She talks about how she graduated second in her class, I think. And she was doctorate, so she's Dr. Barbara Gordon. And she's getting ready to go to a costume party. And since she's considered mousy and quiet, she decides to make a brash costume, so she makes a Batgirl costume. And she quips on how it'll surprise her father later when they unmask everybody and he sees his mousy daughter dressed up as Batgirl in a tight-fitting superhero outfit. She thinks that'll be funny. On her way there, she happens to see a car pulled over and these men dressed as moths beating up a man. Turns out that man was Bruce Wayne. So she also mentions that she has a brown belt in judo and she's an acrobatic and all that other fun stuff, because back in the 60s, to be a superhero, all you had to do was be smart and know judo. So she leaps out of her car and goes to help the man. The man happens to be Bruce Wayne. She recognizes him and tells him to run into the woods while she takes care of these weirdly dressed moth people. So Bruce Wayne runs off into the woods where he's like, oh great, now I can go hide and dress as Batman and go take care of this problem. So while Barbara's fighting the Mothman, they throw her into the substance they covered his car in, which gets her stuck, and then Batman comes and knocks him out, and Killer Moth flies away, and he pulls Batgirl off and thanks her and says he'll handle it, and she go about her way. She decides she can't go to the costume ball because she's all covered in slime now, so she just goes home. Later on in the 2000s, they do a retelling of her origin where she actually goes to that party, and it's a little different, and we'll talk about that later. So she goes home, and Bruce Wayne discovers that Killer Moth is extorting Bruce Wayne for $100,000, and that fight was a warning to scare him into paying. So back to the drawing. As you can see, we're just adding in some of the details and cleaning up the pencils so we get an idea what this looks like and make our lives a little easier when we ink. The hair on something like this is always the fun part because you got to make it work on both sides of her head when it's coming out of a mask. And so there we go, we figured that out. We cleaned up her face so you could see what she's going to look like. Like I said, simple is better on a woman's face. You don't want too many lines or she looks old, which if that's what you're going for, that's cool because there are older women in comic books. It's just Batgirl's not one of them. So Bruce Wayne discovers that he's being hijacked, so he dresses up as Batman and he decides to see if any other millionaires have been bothered. So he visits a few other ones, and all of them have also been extorted by the Mothman, and not Mothman, it's Killer Moth. I keep saying Mothman, but it's Killer Moth. So anyway, Killer Moth, and they've all given him $100,000 because he beat him up and scared the hell out of them. So at the same time, Mothman decides that he's going to make an example out of Bruce Wayne, and he sends his men to stake out his house, and they do, and they report back that he hasn't left. So Barbara Gordon, at the same time, she receives a rare book at the library that Bruce Wayne had her look for him because he collects rare books, and apparently whatever book this was, I forgot the name of, sold for $151,000 back in 1966. That's an editor note, so that's an actual real sale of the book. So in today's money, I don't even want to know what that would be. I'd have to pull out an inflation calculator, but probably be like well over $1 million. So she gets in her car and she says she's going to bring the book over to Bruce because it's too valuable to leave it laying around the library and she doesn't want anything to happen to it. So while she's on her way to Bruce's house, she notices that the Mothmen have killed Bruce Wayne looking through the window. So she's like, oh crap, I gotta help. So she dresses up in her Batgirl costume and runs in and starts taking out the Mothmen. But little does she know that behind the counter, Batman and Robin are watching this go down because they wanted to track Mothman back to his lair, and the Bruce Wayne wasn't really dead. It was just a dummy they dressed up, and apparently the Mothman weren't smart enough to figure out that they murdered a dummy of Bruce Wayne and not an actual person. So after that's all figured out and they scare off the Mothmen, they follow the Mothman back to Killer Moth's hideout. Not Mothman, even though I keep calling him Mothman, he's called Killer Moth. So anytime I called him Mothman in this so far, just remember it's Killer Moth. So when Batman and Robin go in, because of course they tell Batgirl they don't need her help because they don't want to get a girl in trouble, because 1966, that's the way things were back then. They run off, but of course she follows them. And as soon as they enter, they get caught in some kind of gravity trap where they start floating in the air. They say it's some kind of training thing for astronauts, but I'm not sure what they had back then that actually caused actual zero gravity without, the planes going up and down and the astronauts floating in them. But that's a whole nother thing. As for the drawing, I'm doing my favorite thing, and that's spotting the blacks. In the comic book, the original comic book in the 60s, she wore a black outfit with yellow accents. It was just a black one piece with a yellow bat on it. The cape was black and yellow, or it was black and blue. Either way. And then she had yellow boots and yellow gloves and a yellow belt. And her hair stuck out the back. In the TV show where she was first introduced, it was a purple suit, sparkly purple suit, with the yellow accents. And she was played by Yvonne Craig. Initially, I went with the black with the yellow accents, and I pretty much stuck to that, except I decided that the blue was kind of too similar to the sky color that I was using, and brighten up the sky. I didn't want to do that because it was a night thing. So I decided to go with the purple, which you'll see later on, and it looked much better. And back to her origin, she realizes that she could help Batman and Robin by taking the magnet that Batman and Robin were using to track the Mothmobile, we'll call it. So she pulls it out, she sticks it in her shoe and uses it to stick to the metal floor of the anti-gravity chamber. So she slides in, she throws Batman and Robin out, and then they all together go on and they beat up the Mothmen, they capture Killer Moth, they bring him to justice, and they end up in Commissioner Gordon's office saying what a great help and they couldn't have done it without Batgirl, and they trust her any time of the year, and she'll be a valuable part of the team. It then cuts to a one panel with Commissioner Gordon telling Barbara how good of a job that Batgirl done and how Batman and Robin are proud to have her, and she's just smirking in the foreground. Like, wait till little does he know it's his daughter, Barbara Gordon. And here we are again on the drawing. We're filling in where everything is going to be black and surrounding all the other parts to help with inking later and getting it all together. We don't get to that for a little while because I still got to pencil in all the buildings and the fun stuff that goes with that, which is coming up. And now we'll get to the part where Batgirl, this is the second Batgirl, not the first. The first Batgirl was Betty Kane. She was first introduced in Batman 139. This was in 1961, a good 5 years before the TV show and the introduction of Barbara Gordon in Detective Comics 359. She was the niece of the original Batwoman. I believe her name was Kate Kane. She was later retconned into Bet Kane and became Flamebird, and she only had, I think, 7 appearances, it says, before they pretty much cut her out of continuity. They say the reason that her and Batwoman were created was to fight the rumors that Batman and Robin were gay, which, they were, whatever, but they didn't want that in the public opinion in the 60s because that was frowned upon, so they created Batwoman and Batgirl as love interests for Batman and Robin. And when the new editor took over, he decided he wanted more of a serious approach to Batman and Robin, so he did away with a lot of the side characters, including Batgirl, Batwoman, Ace the Bat-Hound, and Batmite, and they took it down a more realistic path, which is actually kind of funny because the TV show went in a more humorous and campy direction, which haunted Batman for years, because if you watch the Adam West Burt Ward Batman show, it was very campy, very straight, and very silly, and extremely unrealistic, which is completely different than the Batman comics at the time. Yeah, the original Batgirl, Bat-Girl, not just Batgirl, Batgirl more like Spider-Man, unfortunately is really forgettable, only made a handful of appearances at first. They brought her back in the 70s, 80s as Flamebird, which was kind of a joke for Flamebird and Nightwing because back in the Silver Age, Superman had foes that were named Nightwing and Flamebird, so it was kind of like a play on that, even though nobody really knows the joke. And she was more of an obsessed fan. She played tennis, she was smart, but she was just obsessed with Nightwing and the Titans, and so she started her career to impress Nightwing and get his attention, and it just didn't go anywhere, and they killed her off a few times. They wrote her out of continuity a few times. They brought her back into continuity a few times, and it's just a messy story and nothing really eventful or lasting effects on the DC universe. On the buildings here, you sketched in where I want them to go quickly, and what I want the background to look like. The BWS that I wrote really sloppily on the background means black with stars. That's when you make the background black and either splatter a white ink on it, or you use a pattern that you made years ago, you scan it on the computer and you bring it in, which I'll do later. And I also separate into a dark blue section and a black section, which is why we ended up changing the color of Batgirl eventually. I also do a little editing of the pose and straighten things out that I didn't like. And in 1999, they introduced another Batgirl, Cassandra Cain. Her first appearance was in Batman number 567. She was the daughter of David Cain and Lady Shiva. She must have had a horrible childhood because they raised her in complete isolation. She was not taught how to speak, and she was trained only to be a master assassin. Not using her brain for things like speech and social skills, she was able to learn people's movements and predict movements and know what you're going to do before you were going to do it by the slight movements that you made. And she was very effective. She could, on a good day, take out Bruce Wayne, Batman, and maybe even Mr. Grayson, Nightwing, but the other Robins wouldn't stand a chance against her. Barbara Gordon wouldn't stand a chance against her. She's pretty lethal and pretty deadly, but eventually Bruce adopted her and trained her in the good ways, even though sometimes she's been a villain. She's been called the Black Bat, and she's fought against them, but ultimately she's a good guy, and she's part of the Batgirl series now, which is a bunch of the Batgirls together. Here you see I busted out the perspective tool that they have in Logic. It's a good thing when you want to keep lines straight and in order. I'm using 1-point perspective. You can see that all the lines on there, they converge in one spot, and that's where I want the focal point to be. But I'm not using any real perspective here. I just went on with the straight on city shot for this one. So you don't really need all that stuff. But as you can see, that tool fights you sometimes, and instead of drawing a straight line, it'll jack it into whatever perspective it's following, and you don't always want that, but it's very helpful. It's a lot better than setting up a perspective points on a piece of paper and having a big ruler and drawing in all these lines yourself. I've done it, I'll do it again, and I'll probably do it many times again, but doing it on the computer is pretty easy. As you can see, you just draw your lines and they all follow the shape you want. So as long as you have an idea of what you want the buildings to look like, it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. There's also another Batgirl. Stephanie Brown, her first appearance was in Detective Comics number 647 in 1992. She wasn't a Batgirl originally. She was the Spoiler. She was the daughter of the criminal known as the Clue Master. She dated Robin for a while. For a while, Tim Drake wasn't Robin, and for a short stint, Stephanie Brown was Robin. And somehow they killed her. I think it was one of those fridging incidents that we mentioned in the Green Lantern with Kyle Reiner's girlfriend. How she was used as a plot point instead of a character. And they killed her off to motivate somebody else. And she was brought back, and she was the Spoiler, and then she was Batgirl for a while. I think in the New 52 series, she started out as Batgirl, or it was right before the New 52. And then in the New 52, they restored Barbara Gordon's mobility, and she was able to walk again, and she picked up the guise of Batgirl. Getting a little bit ahead of myself on Barbara Gordon because there's significant things we're going to talk about a little later on towards the end of the video, or in a little while, that concerns the Killing Joke and Alan Moore and another fridging incident, but we're not there yet. But right now, as you can see, the buildings are coming together. They're very simple, straightforward. I add more detail when I get to the inking and stuff. And I probably should have did all this in the inking stage. It would have saved me some time. But as you can see, they're coming together, and it's looking like a cityscape. And this one is interesting in the fact that I took the time to draw the cityscape to frame Barbara Gordon with the moon in the sky, instead of just throwing a textured background against her and saying, hey guys, look cool, and then maybe draw a few skeleton outlines of a building. Sometimes you just gotta go all in, and you gotta do the work. Because if you don't do the work, your drawing's going to get stale and they're going to get boring, and you're going to end up with a bunch of textured backgrounds, or maybe not even just a solid color. And drawings are about more than just the character. It's about their environment and where they sit, and that's what makes things interesting. You know, I was gonna wait till later in the video, but now is as good a time as any to talk about the Killing Joke, because what happens in the Killing Joke affects things in Barbara Gordon's life after the Killing Joke, and affects them significantly. So Batman the Killing Joke came out in 1989. It was written by Alan Moore and Brian Boland. In that story, a classic story by the way, it's one that every Batman fan should read, the Joker goes on a rampage as he always does, and this time he wants to prove that any sane person would end up just like him if they had a bad enough day. So one bad day could turn anybody into the Joker. So as his target, he decides to pick on the sanest man he could think of, and that person is Commissioner Gordon. So Commissioner Gordon and Barbara Gordon are at the apartment looking at a photo album, talking about dinner and mundane things, when there's a knock on the door. Barbara Gordon answers the door, and it's the Joker. Without saying a word, he shoots her straight through the stomach. The bullet goes through her spine. She collapses on the floor, and they knock out Commissioner Gordon. The Joker then begins to undress Barbara Gordon and start taking pictures of her, and it's heavily implied that she is sexually assaulted, but it's not shown or stated in the book. Before all this happens, Batman goes to Arkham Asylum to visit the Joker to have a talk. He wants to talk to them about their future, because he knows one way or another it's going to end with one of them dead, and Batman being Batman, he wants to avoid that at all costs. While he's there, he realizes that that's not the Joker, it's somebody else in makeup pretending to be the Joker, and the Joker has escaped. While that's going on, the Joker is purchasing an old amusement park that's run down, dilapidated, so he could set it up to give Jim Gordon that one bad day that he thinks would make anybody just like him. Part of that is he sends him on a roller coaster ride through a funhouse kind of thing where there's images on the wall, and all the images are the pictures of a shot, naked, and crying Barbara Gordon, thinking that that would push him to his edge. When he gets out and he beats him around, Batman shows up, beats up the Joker, gets Jim Gordon out. While he's getting Jim Gordon out, he checks on him, sees if he's okay, and he calls him a sick son of a you know what, but he's okay, and that Batman needs to go capture the Joker. So Batman goes out, he catches up to the Joker, beats him up, stops him, and then the Joker starts laughing. Batman asks him what he's laughing about, and he says this whole situation reminds him of a joke. So he proceeds to tell Batman a joke about two crazy people who escape an asylum, and one makes it to the other side of this cavern, and the other guy has a flashlight. So the one who made it across tells him, he says, hey, give me the flashlight, and when you do, I'll shine the light and you could walk across it to get to the other side. And the other criminal, who's on the other side of the cavern with the flashlight, says, no, you'll shut it off when I'm halfway across. Implying that he'll fall to his death, but the joke is that it wouldn't work anyway because you can't walk on a flashlight beam. And the Joker starts laughing. Batman starts laughing along with him, and it turns kind of like into a scene where Batman almost looks like a demon, and he's laughing with the Joker, and it pans out panel by panel to the raindrops hitting the ground, which is how it started. And it's implied that Batman, at that moment, he kills the Joker. This was originally intended to be an Elseworld story, which doesn't take place in the main continuity, so killing the Joker would be okay, but since they don't show it, they wrap it into the main continuity, and they use that to start another chapter of Barbara Gordon's life. This story is criticized because of its use of Barbara Gordon as a plot point, similar to Kyle Reiner's girlfriend in the fridging incident that we talked about in the Green Lantern thing, where she doesn't really serve as a character and just a plot point to motivate the Joker and Batman and Commissioner Gordon to get to the end of the story, and she has no real character development or anything in there other than being shot. There's also an animated version of The Killing Joke, which I would highly recommend you do not watch. It is awful. I mean, it has a good voice cast. It has Mark Hamill as the Joker, and Kevin Conroy reprised his role as Batman. And they added in an opening scene to it to kind of flesh out Barbara Gordon to solve the fridging problem. And all it does is make it worse. They just make her an obsessed teenager. She seduces Batman on a rooftop, and Batman lets it happen, which is even worse if you ask me. And it's just a mess of a story, and the animation's terrible, and the rest of it pretty much plays out like the comic book, but the whole intro thing is just bad. especially because I think they imply that she was pregnant when she was shot. Because back in the comic book and the cartoon, there's a scene where Batman goes to the hospital to check on her and see if she's okay. And she tells him that she's never seen the Joker this crazy and there's something different about him and she has to stop him. But don't kill him and bring him to justice. Which initially I don't think happened. I think the original ending, which is implied, is that he kills the Joker. Again in 1989, in the Unalive Squad, number 23, because you can't say the S word on YouTube, Barbara Gordon finds herself as a paraplegic, and she uses her technical knowledge and computer skills to become Oracle, the eyes and the ears of Gotham City. There she helps the squad, she helps the Bat family, and every time they need information or they need to find something, they go to Barbara Gordon. She works out of what's called the Clock Tower, the Watchtower is a Justice League thing. The Clock Tower is where she set up her headquarters. It's a giant clock tower with all her technology and her hardware and her computer stuff, and that's where she does her job as Oracle. In the New 52, which I believe started in 2016, she got some kind of spinal implant and was able to move again and resumed her role as Batgirl, replacing Stephanie Brown. The Stephanie Brown run had some great covers by Stanley Artgerm. He did a run of covers. One of them is a classic cover. It goes for a decent amount of money. And he's since done a bunch of variant covers and whatnot for DC and Marvel and many other companies. He's the reason those lifelike anime covers are so popular. They're almost photorealistic, but they're still very anime-ish. And then after his cover run, when the New 52 happened, and Barbara Gordon became Batgirl again, Adam Hughes did a run of covers, another run of classic covers. Most of them aren't really worth anything like the Stanley Artgerm ones were. Stanley Artgerm Lau ones are, but they're still very cool covers, and they made those issues pop off the stands. Anything Adam Hughes does is like gold, and they popped off the stands. And then later, I believe it was after New 52, after Rebirth, there was a series of covers by, I believe it was Josh Middleton, and those covers are pretty awesome too. I have a lot of those. I don't have the one really iconic one, because I missed that one because I don't pick up comics regularly. But when I saw the other ones, I picked up a few at the local comic shop. The art on the covers is great. I haven't actually read them, but the covers are nice. All right, now we're inking our hair. The hair, I kind of like to do it in big sections. I'm not like the stringy, single-stranded hair kind of guy. I just like to get the flow that I like, kind of like drawing a cape. You get the flow going, you get the direction, you get the shape you want. You throw in some lines to make it look like it's moving and that it has texture in here. And then you move on to something else. Like right now I'm doing her ears. And I'm also adding the white ticks and the line work that I did on the Daredevil that we did earlier to bring more texture and interest to the drawing, because just big black blocks aren't always enough. And right now we're doing the shoes. I'm going to do some videos in the next week or two that concentrate on things like hands and feet and individual body parts, just to show how to get those to look realistic and good on your drawings. Realistic, I say realistic. I don't really draw in a realistic style, but to get the shapes right and everything. And if you draw a great looking figure and your hands and your feet are off, then it kind of throws off the whole figure. I tend to draw hands big and chunky. I like big fists and big knuckles and big fingers. It's something I've been doing since, I started drawing, really. I used to draw the characters with giant eyes, but I brought that down a bit. They're less anime now, but they're still bigger than most people draw comic eyes. Like this hand here is just laying flat, so the trick is, what do you do with all the other fingers? So we just start throwing little bumps and black shadow, and you get the illusion that there's a bunch of fingers in the background, which is coming up now. See? That's all you need to do. And back to Batgirl. Not only has she appeared in comics, but she's appeared in many episodes of Batman the Animated Series and other DC animated films. In the 90s, she was in one of the first serious attempts at a superhero show on a major network, and that was Birds of Prey, which was sort of loosely based on the comic book, where she wasn't Batgirl, but she portrayed Oracle. And the main hero of this series was the Huntress, which was Helena Wayne, I believe. They went with the whole version of Batwoman, Catwoman's daughter kind of deal. And Barbara Gordon was Oracle. There are a few flashbacks with her in a black bat suit with the yellow and the traditional look, but those are just flashbacks and she doesn't really go out in them. And right now we're working on the cape. The flow of the cape is important. The reason why I drew Batgirl in this drawing was because I wanted to draw a cape. The original idea was going to be a Catwoman because that was requested by somebody I knew, and I started drawing it as Catwoman, and I realized, you know what? I want to put a cool cape on this, and I want some flowing hair. So the logical choice from there was to turn it into Batgirl. Although, if I did do a video on Catwoman, it'd probably be easier to talk about Catwoman for an hour, considering she's been around since Batman #1, 1940 was her first appearance, which is also the same as the first appearance of the Joker. She didn't have a costume, she just wore a dress gown, made a few appearances after that, then later on she put on a costume where she wore like a actual cat mask. It looked like she was a giant cat head on a dress with a cloak, and then from there she went to like a purple dress with a green cape, and her mask was more reminiscent of Batman's with the black top of the 60s and the big ears, but it was like a purple dress and a green cape. And then her first Silver Age appearance was in an issue of Lois Lane, I forget the number. And then she wore that purple dress with the green cape for a long time. Eventually, Frank Miller did an origin for Catwoman, kind of like he did with Year One and what he did for Daredevil Born Again and Daredevil the Man Without Fear. And in those issues, he put Catwoman in a gray catsuit, a skin-tight bodysuit with a traditional cat mask. And ever since then, I think it was the mid-'80s, and ever since that series, they have put Catwoman in a similar costume, whether it be black or gray, sometimes blue, but that's become Catwoman's traditional costume from that point on. Thank you again, Frank Miller. So now we're inking the buildings, and I'm using the perspective ruler again. And you got to shut it off if you don't want to make a straight line. You can't, at least as far as I can figure out, you can't do arches or bent curves or anything while using the perspective ruler. I'm going to dig into that deeper because I'm used to drawing perspective by hand, and this is kind of new to me. That's why we did a one-point perspective with a straight-on shot of the buildings. So I just decided to draw on all the straight lines first, and then I'll do anything that goes off the grid, like a curved line or the tops to the little water towers in the back and the squiggly lines on the antennas in the towers. Those I do afterwards. I'm going to do a video just on perspective eventually, and in that one I'm going to use probably a 2-point or a 3-point perspective and really show you how to get into getting the buildings looking cool. And I don't know if that'll be a character one, or I'll just do a character, another swinging through the city kind of thing, maybe a Batman or something, and we'll have a city behind them instead of nothing. But this one is just a pretty straightforward front-on city. You see these all the time. Sometimes they're even less detailed than this. They're just big black blocks with little windows in them. And I almost thought of going that round, but I wanted to have a black background with the blue in the middle and the star, so big black buildings would have kind of not worked out the way I wanted them to. In fact, this drawing took much longer than the other ones that I did because of these buildings, which is going to happen. But if you want to have a good drawing and you want to have architecture and you don't just want a textured background like I do a lot, because it's quick, it's simple, it looks good, and it's good for a print. You know, if you just got something to hang on your wall, like a poster style thing, it looks really cool. But sometimes you want to take that extra mile and you want to draw the buildings and all the windows, and so that's what we're doing here. So I think in drawings like this, the background, even though you don't really look at it, the character is still your focal point. The background is just as interesting as the character in the foreground. And also, as we move through this series and I keep doing these drawings and walking you through the little things and giving you all the fun little history of the characters, I want to know if there's anything you want to see. You could obviously request characters, and I'll put those in the queue and get to them in some kind of order. Like the Fantastic Four one, somebody requested Galactus and the Silver Surfer. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but that one's going to be done closer to the movie coming out. And somebody also requested Superman, and that'll be coming closer to the movie. But if you want to see other things, like I'm going to do one on drawing hands and feet, and one on different textures, and probably one on perspective eventually. But if I'm leaving something out and there's something you want to see me draw or walk through drawing of, like heads, eyes, weapons, whatever, let me know and I'll put that on the list and I'll get to it as soon as humanly possible. So I was curious how much longer I had left to talk here, and I realized I have another half an hour to go. I pretty much went through all of Barbara Gordon's history. We touched on Betty Kane. We touched on Cassandra Cain. We touched on Stephanie Brown, the spoiler. And I'm running out of Batgirl information. So this is going to be a rough one. But right now, if you look on the buildings, we're putting in the bricks. I decided that they were just a little too plain with the sidewalls and they needed a little more to them. So I decided to put some cracks in the stucco on the sides of the buildings and throw some bricks in. These were just freehanding. These are not done with the perspective guides or the perspective rulers because it's just simpler that way, and it makes it look a little more organic if all the lines aren't perfectly straight and sterile. Like when we get over here, we're back to the straight lines and add in the windows like we did before, except now I am not using the perspective grid because I needed a little more freedom with them. So I just kind of used the line tool and got the 90-degree angles that way, so I can line everything up where I wanted it. And same thing here. We're just using the line tool without the grids turned on so that, you know, they're not perfectly straight all the time, but I needed them to line up better, and so I decided that was the easiest way to go. Plus up here we have this big arch on the top of the building I put in for no good reason, and I couldn't do that on the perspective grid either, so I used the curve tool actually. You draw a line, you pull it, and it makes a curve. It's a fun little thing. Then just draw on the rest of the texture, fill it in black, and we have the top of a building. Another interesting thing to do with buildings is you black out some of the windows because nobody's ever in every room all the time in every building, especially at night. A lot of people go home for the day. A lot of people are sleeping. For all we know, Batgirl's hanging out on that roof at 3 o'clock in the morning, where most people are sleeping or definitely have gone home from work then, unless they're workaholics and it's their thing, which I've done that. I've stayed at work for 12 to 24 hours to get projects done, and I would not recommend it, kids. Just do your job, go home, and enjoy your life. Do not waste your time in an office. I probably shouldn't say that on these videos, but, you know, we all have to make choices like that sometime. On this particular building, I decided to go with a lot of black to fill in, so the windows were more in the black background to make it stand out, and so that all the buildings didn't have the same white with a few windows. And the other thing you got to do is you got to be careful when you're filling in the windows. You don't want to make like a checkerboard pattern. You want it to look kind of random because, you know, people aren't planning out there when they're opening and closing their windows. It's just something that happens randomly. If you look at a skyline city, you'll see a whole line of windows and one out, and sometimes you'll see a whole line out and 2 or 3 lit, and, you know, they make interesting patterns, and that's the whole point. Keep the patterns interesting and fun to look at. And like here, we just added a little water tower. It's small, it's not very detailed, and when you zoom out, you can barely tell it's there, but the little things like that keep your drawings interesting. And back to Barbara Gordon, or in this case, we're going to call her Barbara Wilson. In 1997, they released what is universally considered the worst of the Batman movie, and that is Batman and Robin. That one starred George Clooney as Bruce Wayne Batman, who I thought made an excellent Bruce Wayne and thought he would be a great Bruce Wayne Batman, and he did a good job of what he had, but the script was awful, and we'll get to that in a bit. It also had Chris O'Donnell as Robin, and Richard Grayson. We won't call him by his normal name because I don't know if that's appropriate for YouTube either. And then in that movie, Alicia Silverstone played Batgirl. But instead of being Barbara Gordon, the daughter of Commissioner Gordon, She was Barbara Wilson, the niece of Alfred Pennyworth. And her origin was she was, Alfred's niece. Her parents, they were living in England. She was going to boarding school. And her parents died in an accident. So she decides to come to America to free Alfred from his servitude because she figured it was beneath him to be a servant to anybody and a butler. She didn't realize that he was more of a father figure to Bruce Wayne. So she came back, and of course she discovers that Batman and Robin are Bruce Wayne and Mr. Grayson. So she, along with the help of Alfred, makes her a Batgirl suit, and she joins the fight to stop Poison Ivy, Bane, and Mr. Freeze. When I first saw the movie, I thought it was kind of cool because you finally got to see Batman doing Batman things. He's jumping around, he's doing flips. The opening scene is this ridiculous fight with Mr. Freeze's ice people, and they got ice skates in their boots, but it's very action-packed and frenetic. But it's one of those things where after you watch it again, and then you watch it a third time, you're like, wow, I thought that was kind of cool, but it's actually pretty bad. And now we are on to the colors. Initially, I did Batgirl in this dark blue color. And I pretty much get to the point where I'm done filling in her costume and coloring, and I get back to it, and then I decide that was a bad idea. And when we get to that point, you'll see what I did, and we'll talk about it. But yeah, right now we're just filling in the big blocks of colors like we always do. We just got to get the big colors in before we could add any of the shading, the lights, the darks, the line work in the shading. So one step at a time. And during the pandemic, they announced that they were making a Batgirl movie starring Leslie Grace. I'm not quite sure who she is. I've never seen her in anything. But she was going to play Batgirl, and I thought that was cool because, as we went over earlier in the video, Batgirl as a character has been with me since the beginning when I started collecting comic books. How I got her first appearance in a little store, and how I kept a nicer copy from the other collection. So when I saw they were making a Batgirl movie and that Michael Keaton was going to reprise his role as Batman, who was my Batman from when I was younger, we'll tell that story when we do a Batman video. And so I was excited to see this movie, and the suit was a little clunky, but they started out with her Burnside outfit, which I didn't talk about. We'll get to that, where it's more of a leather outfit that she puts together herself because she's done with Bruce Wayne and Batman and his money, and she wants to strike out on her own and be her own woman and do her own thing. So she starts going to a college in a part of Gotham City known as Burnside, and she just basically does her superhero work out of there. And I actually like the costume. It's more of a realistic version of what a superhero costume would be. Leather jacket, leather pants, padding, and she does her thing independently of the Bat family for a little while. Then eventually, I believe Sean Gordon-Murphy designs a new costume for her, and she signs back up with Bruce and co. and starts adventuring off with them again. So the movie, not only did it have Michael Keaton back as Batman, it was going to be, I'm going to guess it was going to be an origin story, because eventually by the end of the movie, she got a more armored, traditional movie superhero costume, and she fought along Michael Keaton. But the villain was going to be Firefly, who we talked about earlier, and he was played by Brendan Fraser, and we didn't talk about him earlier. We talked about Killer Moth earlier, so oops. But he was also in another DC series called Doom Patrol, where he played Robot Man, Cliff Steele, and that was a fun show. It's weird as hell. I mean, it was weird. And I still have to watch the last season of that. It's been out for a few years now. I should probably get back to that. And another weird thing is the Commissioner Gordon in this movie was J.K. Simmons, not the guy who played him in the Batman movie, who was Jeffrey Wright, who is also one of my favorite movies, called Basquiat, about the street artist Jean-Michel Basquiat. He was one of the guys who hung out with Andy Warhol and became probably greater than Warhol in the end. And shortly after Warhol died, he also died. It was an overdose. And he's probably one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, if not the greatest. He started out as a street artist and moved into the Neo-Expressionism movement. I had to look that part up, by the way. I did not know anything about the Neo-Expressionist movement. But I have seen a bunch of Basquiat's. They have some at a local museum, and I've been to the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, a few times to check out some Van Goghs, and then I found the Basquiat room, and I was floored. He just made a major impression on me as far as that goes. I mean, I don't draw or do art anything like him, but the energy and the life that he put into things is amazing, and it definitely influenced me in that way, especially his use of colors. And he does a lot of things that seem sort of ridiculous, but on the other hand, they're just brilliant. And I was down there not that long ago. I went to some galleries with a friend of mine in the city, and they had some prints of his, and I never realized he actually did superhero drawings. He had like Flash one, and I think it's Spider-Man, and those were really cool too. They're not traditional superhero drawings by any means, but his take on them were pretty amazing. And the point of this is that you don't have to just be inspired by comic book artists. You could be inspired by anybody. Andy Warhol, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Jackson Pollock, even though he was just splattering paint around. But, there's a market for that. It could be Michelangelo. It could be Van Gogh. It doesn't just have to be comic book artists. There's a lot of art out there, and there's a lot to be appreciated. And I completely lost where I was going, but I was talking about the Batgirl movie that was supposed to come out around 2021, I think. Somewhere in that range. And it had a great cast. It probably wasn't going to be a great movie since it was just going to be a direct-to-streaming thing. But as a Batgirl fan, it's something I was looking forward to, and something we'll never see, because apparently Warner Brothers was taking over at that time, and the head of the department, I forget his name, it's not important, he decided he didn't want to release it, and he shelved it, and they put it in as a tax write-off. So they can never show it, because if they do, they'll have to pay the penalties and the money that they saved in the taxes for putting the movie out. So at one time, the director even tried to go in and see it for himself, but he was locked out of the servers, so he doesn't even have a copy of the movie. So the chances of the whole thing leaking online are pretty slim too. So sadly, it's a movie that unfortunately we'll never get to see. And if we do, I'll be the first in line, because even if it's not a good movie, it's a Batgirl movie, and I support that. And now we're back to the color. We're coloring in her hair. I'm starting out with a darker orange because she's a redhead. And then later on, I add an even darker shadows and some brighter highlights to give the hair movement and motion and keep everything looking interesting. I also touch little things up like the yellow in her gloves. And if you learn anything from watching me do this drawing, is it's not to rush things, because in this one I do a lot of things and then I end up doing a lot of things over again. Like I changed the whole color of her outfit at one point. And the batarang she's holding, I end up coloring it in like 2 or 3 times because I keep going over it in other parts of the drawing and I have to redo it, especially when I do the background colors. In fact, I get to the end of the drawing and the drawing is completely done, and then I realize, oh, I did not color in the batarang. So you'll notice a skip at the end when the drawing is finished, in quotes. The batarang isn't colored in, and then it fades to the end drawing, and the batarang is colored. That is a little mistake I made and corrected before I finalized the video, although I did not record that part because I forgot to push the little button on the screen capture device. Another thing that occurred to me while drawing this is many years ago, I apprenticed to be a tattoo artist. I decided that wasn't the thing for me, drawing on people. It just wasn't something I think I could have done for a living. So I didn't follow through, but thank you to my friends who supported me and ran the shop that took me in as an apprentice. I appreciate that. And one day while I was there, I decided I wanted to draw a Batgirl like my way. I want to do my own version of Batgirl. And I kind of drew her. It's almost like a 90s kid. She was wearing the purple and yellow, but it was a purple, almost like a wife beater with the yellow bat symbol, which would have been screen printed or spray painted on it. She was wearing a pair of cargo shorts, again purple, and a pair of combat boots, yellow combat boots, a yellowish brown. I went a little more brown and yellow on her accessories. And instead of having, she did have a utility belt, but again, it was like a brown military belt. And she also had the 90s pouches on her legs, like Rob Liefeld used to do, but was more in the cargo style to match the cargo shorts she was wearing. And her mask was more of the domino mask, kind of like the original Batgirl, Betty Keane. I don't know if I still have a copy of that drawing around anywhere, because I've had quite a few computer crashes since then, and I've lost some drawings. But if I find it one day, I'll do like a collage video and talk about things, and I'll throw it up in there. But right now, we're working on the shading. Right now, we're adding in the lighter highlights and the darker highlights, and we're getting it to look like it has some dimension. But thinking back on the kind of comics I read back in the day and the ones that I enjoy now, they're mostly street-level heroes, like Batman, Daredevil, Spider-Man even, and Barbara Gordon. She's a little unique in those kinds of characters because she wasn't really born out of tragedy. Her parents weren't murdered. She wasn't assaulted or abused in any way. She's just a girl who wanted to do good and looked up to the vigilantes in her town and had the means to do so. She's not expertly trained to begin with. She basically was just a brown belt in judo and an average gymnast. Of course, she was brought in by Bruce Wayne, who is the greatest combatant in the DC universe. The man literally knows every form of martial arts and combat in the DC universe, and some that aren't even born of this earth. He knows some alien ones too. He's mastered them all, and I'm sure he shared a lot of that knowledge with her and the rest of the Bat family, and I'm sure that helps her in her crime-fighting duties on a day-to-day basis, because a little judo isn't going to get you very far on the streets of Gotham City. In fact, I don't know why anybody would even want to live in Gotham City. There's always some kind of catastrophe. There's a criminal on every corner. I mean, I'd be afraid to go and take a walk during the day in the nicest neighborhood of Gotham, let alone downtown or on the streets at night. The place seems crazy and not a fun place to live. I mean, anywhere where you gotta wake up in the morning and wonder if the Joker's gonna gash you or the Penguin's gonna take you down in a gunfight between a rival gang, or Two-Face is gonna kidnap you and flip a coin deciding on whether you live or die or not. That's definitely not the kind of city I'd want to live in, or I think anybody would really want to live in. Adventure or not, that's a little too much. The city's destroyed all the time. There's a No Man Land series where it ran through all the Batmans, where it introduced Cassandra Cain. She got her first appearance there as Batgirl. That's when the city was destroyed and they declared martial law, and Batman and the Bat family were trying to keep it together while the criminals went amok, because the city was literally blocked off from the rest of the country. They blew up the bridges. It was a mess. They did something like that in the Batman movie too. But the good thing that came out of that story was it's one of the stories where Harley Quinn was introduced into the main DC continuity, and it also gave us the first appearance of Cassandra Cain, another Batgirl. So still doesn't make me want to live in Gotham City though. I probably wouldn't want to live in Metropolis either, but at least in Metropolis it's cleaner, it's a little brighter, and people are pretty much afraid to get in Superman's way, and he could be in multiple places at once. He's that fast, so wouldn't want to live there either, but at least it's a little bit safer. And now we're doing more of shading in the color. We're adding some dimension to the yellow of her gloves and her cape, and we're going with like a darker, more of an ochre color, almost a brown, but when you put it into the yellow, it just looks like a nice bit of shading. If you're first starting out doing this and you want to try coloring like this, the easiest way to do it is just to take a shade of gray, and turn your color mode on to multiply. I believe multiply would be the way you would go. And you just color that over the color, and it'll darken whichever part of it you're going over, and it'll give you a similar effect. It won't be as dynamic because it'll just mute and darken the color. It won't be a separate color, if that makes any sense. So it'll be darker, it'll have dimension, it just won't have the same bite to it, I guess. Like right here, we're gonna lighten it up and we're gonna put a lighter yellow over it, almost a white yellow, and this could be accomplished the same way. You just take a white layer and you draw that over it, and you could work with the opacity, or you could set that to, I believe the mode would be lighten. I'd have to try that out, but I'm doing the voiceover after the drawing, so I can't do that. But as you can see, putting the light in the dark kind of gives the cape 3 dimensions, and it pops, and you don't have to get into too much blending or blurring. I hardly ever do that. I do a little bit in this drawing because I decided she needs a little color to her face, and even when you're drawing male characters, you'd always put a little red or pink in their cheeks and the tip of their nose and their ears. You can make it really light and almost imperceptible, but you still kind of need it to, you know, make them look like they're actually people and not just flat cardboard cutouts. And this is the part I was talking about earlier where I wasn't happy with the blue of her costume and I wanted it to be more of a purple. So I basically just went in there, selected all the blue, and then with the hue and saturation sliders that you find in the edit menu, it's edit, and then it's like color something or other. And then there's hue and saturation. And when you got all that color selected, the top slider, you can slide it, and it'll change the color from blue to red, green, yellow, whatever you want. And I decided to stick with the more traditional purple of Barbara Gordon's costume because I just figured that would pop more, because I was going to use a dark blue in the sky and figure purple would be a better color for her costume for being out there. And like doing her superheroing. And back to the red and the pink on her face gives them more of a realistic look to them, even if you're not drawing in realistic style. In fact, I do this to her cheeks, and I actually do blur it in so that it's barely there, but it's there enough to give her a more realistic look to her. Alright, that was a weird cut between the purple of the costume and the fleshy pink thing. I apologize for that, but I almost missed over the whole changing it to purple because I thought that was later in the video after I had the buildings in and everything. So, getting back to the coloring, now we're coloring the buildings, which basically just grays and tannish colors, nothing too crazy there, a little reddish brown for the bricks, and you still got to give it a little bit of texture. And in this one, when I put the texture on the drawing, it really helps the buildings to have their texture and look more stone and more organic. In fact, if I was drawing this and I didn't plan on putting textures on the actual characters in the whole drawing, I would still put it on the buildings just to make them look more realistic and less like just colored in blocks of brown. And then I was thinking about it, and a little earlier I talked about a version of Batgirl I did where she was more my version, where she was wearing more normal street clothes and going out and doing her thing. And I have I do these drawings on canvas. I won't really call them paintings. I do the black and white drawing like I would here. I ink it on the canvas with black paint pens, pretty much exactly how I would do it here, but I don't color in the figure. I just mask it off, and then I do colors in the background, like a bright blue with green bursts and lines coming off them and some splattered ink. And I usually outline parts in white, and it gives it a really dynamic look. And I've done portraits of people. Not my favorite thing to do, but they're gonna pay you for it, and you're an artist, you take what you can get. And one time somebody commissioned me, and they wanted me to draw them a female comic book character. It was a woman, and I suggested Batgirl. And she's like, oh yeah, Batgirl, cool. She's like, I don't want a traditional Batgirl though. I said, well, I have just the thing. And I showed her the image that I drew a long time ago. She's like, yes, do me that. So I did that Batgirl as a commission on a canvas. I believe it was an 18 by 24. And I should show it to you here, but I'm not, because I have to find a picture to it and re-record this whole video. But eventually I'm going to put up a gallery of things that I've drawn that aren't in these videos, and all that kind of stuff will be in there. But that was a fun one to do. I like doing the canvas drawings. In fact, if you see me at a convention, which I will be doing a couple around here, I will have some canvas drawings available. They're not the cheapest thing I do, but they're definitely the coolest thing that I do. And one of these days, I'll figure out how to set up a camera, and I'll record myself doing one of those just to break it up a little from all these digital drawings, because sometimes you got to draw things organically. You shouldn't just stick to one thing all the time, because then you stagnate and you don't grow as an artist or an illustrator. I mostly call myself an illustrator, not an artist. It's a thing I've done because I do more of a commercial art than a fine art. Some people might debate that or disagree, but that's the way I've always looked at it. And here we are, we're still just coloring the buildings. We're just coloring the trim with the gray and filling it in, and eventually we do all the windows in, I believe, a blue and give them some lighter highlights. We'll get to that in a minute. But right now we're still just doing the gray and adding in some line work to the buildings that I didn't do with the perspective ruler. And plus, it takes the stiffness away from it to have some natural lines, like the ticks in those front brick buildings and the messiness of the water towers. I just think that takes away from the stiffness of the lines that we use with the perspective grid. And when I draw buildings by hand, I'll usually use rulers to lay out everything the way you see it. And if it's a 2 or a 3-point perspective, I usually won't use a ruler for the main lines. I'll just freehand it, but I'll keep it nice and straight as I can, just so it looks a little more organic than sterile straight lines. And a few years ago, they had a Joker month cover where every cover that month had a variant cover that was Joker related. And as we mentioned earlier, Batgirl and the Joker have a history where he crippled her and possibly assaulted her. And one of the covers that was done by an artist called Raphael Albuquerque, if I'm saying that right, like Albuquerque, New York, he did a cover of the Joker with his arms around Batgirl. One hand he's drawing a smile on her face in blood, looking like a Joker smile, while she looks scared out of her wits, like terrified. And he's also holding a gun in his other hand draped over her shoulder. And his eyes are all black, and he's got the evil Joker smile, and he's just terrorizing her in this cover. And there was a voicing out about how this is inappropriate because of their history and what happened between him and Batgirl. And the artist actually asked for the cover to be withdrawn because of all the backlash he was getting. So it wasn't really DC Comics' choice. Well, it was. They could have published it anyway. It was the artist, and it was never published. I mean, it's a great drawing, but it's terrifying, and I can understand why people didn't want it to be published. But on the other hand, it's also a piece of art, and it tells a story between the two characters. So, I don't know. I probably would have bought one, but I could definitely see why the cover was pulled and why it was never available to the public. There have been bootlegs made, but it was never officially released. Okay, now you see where we're adding in the blue for the windows. It's a really light bluish gray, but you can see it does a great job of breaking up all the brown and the black in the buildings. And then we add some lighter white to break that up too. And here I am filling in ledges that I didn't do on the other side. And filling in the windows. And you can't talk about Batgirl without talking about her on and off relationship with Richard Grayson, who we won't call by his short name that they use in the comics because I'm trying to be family friendly here and I don't want my video flagged for using an inappropriate word aimed towards male anatomy. Even for a little while, DC tried to get away from it and call him Rick Grayson. Rick with an R, not with the D. And they had to switch back because people mocked them, and it's been his name since his introduction in 1940. Why would you change it now? And that is an official short version of the name Richard. And but yeah, him and Batgirl had on off again, and it led to awkward moments between her sometimes when he was dating another member of the Teen Titans named Starfire, who's this giant Amazonian looking woman with orange skin and, you know, from an alien world, and she's extremely exotic. And Barbara Gordon, who is a good looking woman as far as comic characters go, she's still just an Earth woman, which led to some awkward moments between the two of them, with Starfire and Barbara Gordon and Richard Grayson. But now, as you can see, I've moved along to the sky, and instead of just doing a black sky with some splattered stars, I decided to go with 2 shades of blue cutting into each other. You could blur this together and give it that blended sky look, but as I'm sure you figured out by now, I'm more of a fan of the hard edges, so I cut it in and make the shapes the way that I wanted to look as far as the sky, and cutting across Barbara to draw more attention to her. And as you can see, when I also did that, I lost the whites of her eyes and the white of her teeth because I filled the background in white. And my bottom layer, my paper layer, is white, but I didn't have a block of white behind her, which is something that I probably should have done. And if I was coloring using the darken modes or the multiply mode, where you color over the black, I would have had to have done that. And here, just to make the moon glow a little, I use my favorite thing, the gradient dots, to give it some glow and dimension. And sometimes I don't know really how to do it in Clip Studio. It's something I do in Photoshop. But I blur the white and then I convert that into a Ben-Day gradient pattern and put that over the top. Well, there I am, adding in the whites of her eyes again. And when you do that gradient pattern, it makes the moon look more like it's got a glow to it. And you could also see I added in a star pattern for the background, which is basically just a piece of paper that I took a bunch of years ago and splattered black ink on it. And then I scanned it into the computer and I inverted it, and then the splatter turns into the stars. And here I am giving her the whites of her eyes back and adding a texture to the background, because, you know, what's one of my drawings without a texture added to it? This one's a little harsh, it's a little rough, but in the end I lighten it up and I make it work. And as you can see, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't have her batarang colored in. That's something we add in at the end. And I decided to darken up the picture a little because it looked a little too bright for me for being at night. So I just threw a black layer over it and brought it down a lot. And I'm also going to go for the poster edge look like I did with Stitch. So I pulled out another texture there and I threw it over the top and resize it and give that ripped poster edge look again. It takes a little messing around with it and rotating and resizing it to get it somewhere where I want it to be, but eventually we get it there and it gives the look that I want, because I sometimes just having an open square picture, it just, to me, feels like it needs something more to stand out and to frame it. And since there's no actual frame to put it in, we'll frame it in the drawing. And with all that out of the way, our drawing of Barbara Gordon's pretty much done. I'd like to thank you all for coming along for the ride with me while we drew Batgirl and talked a bit about her history. And we also covered the history of some of the other Batgirls, Cassandra Cain, Betty Kane, and Stephanie Brown. And I haven't asked yet, but I should probably ask you to like and subscribe to videos and all that other stuff you're supposed to do, ring the bell icons. And as I mentioned before, see, I forgot to color in the batarang, so I added that in here at the end, because when I put the color for the sky in the background, we lost the batarang. And there she is. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.